What's up? I am David Long. This video is a clip from my recent video, Why Non-Reductionism is a Better Meta-Theory. If you enjoy this clip, consider watching the full-length video. So I'm seeing some of the comments in my last video saying something like, oh, how can you just take Integral or Ken Wilber's work, add a little bit to it, and then say it's your own? Well, first of all, I'm not taking credit for all of these things. I didn't come up with all these elements myself. And let's be real, neither did Ken Wilber. In fact, one of the big criticisms of Ken Wilber when he came out with Integral was that he didn't come up with any of those things, that he was just taking a bunch of other people's work and packaging it together and selling it as his own. The word integral comes from integral yoga and Aurobindo, and that's where also the state stages and the words gross, subtle, causal, and non-dual as it relates to states comes from. The stages are generally taken from spiral dynamics and the work of Claire Graves and Don Beck. The lines of development come from developmental psychology, and obviously types already existed. The only thing that Wilber really contributed in this mix is the idea of quadrants and some distinctions about the interplay between some of these elements. These are meta-theories. So by nature, what we're doing is collecting up all the different work and telling you how you can incorporate it. And non-reductionism isn't just integral theory plus modes. It might look like that when you see, oh, it's a lot of the same elements and there's also a map. But those are probably the main two things that we have in common. Pizza and pasta might have the same ingredients, but they're not the same dish. What makes all the difference in the world is how you're using those ingredients and what you do with them and what you create with them. And one of my criticisms of Integral is that Integral knows a lot of the ingredients, but they don't have the recipe. It's not enough to just put a bunch of ingredients on the table and say, now you can cook. No, if you want to cook, you have to know how to use the ingredients. Knowing what the ingredients to make a cake are is not the same as knowing how to make a cake. So there's a bunch of important distinctions that have to happen beyond just pointing out what the ingredients are. Get past the categorization game and talk about the recipes. Chefs are not people who just list ingredients. Chefs get credit when they invent recipes. Big difference. And what did Wilber come up with? Quadrants? Well, earlier in this video, we already talked about how divisions of four already existed, and basically we're just applying something like yin and yang to ontology. I think you could say that quadrants is basically divisions of four applied to ontology. And this tool wasn't invented by Ken Wilber. Other people have used it in the past, like Carl Jung used it to come up with MBTI types, and the different mental functions are basically quadrants within quadrants. Basically, divisions of four is just yin and yang. You have duality, which is a unity, and even within that duality, there are these little dots. So if you take that and you twist it, then you have individuals and collectives, interiors and exteriors, as it would relate to ontology. So, I mean, yeah, we can give him at least partial credit for that. Did Wilber come up with the pre-trans fallacy? Well, kinda. He says that he is basically saying the same thing as Joseph Campbell, and he doesn't really follow that rule himself. So what's really the value of coming up with a distinction if you don't also apply it yourself? And he often does confuse and conflate pre-trans rational and pre-trans egoic. Some people have also suggested that it might be better to call trans-rational post-formal because there's a lot of confusion in the community about what trans-rational even means. A lot of people will use the word trans-rational while they're committing pre-trans fallacy number 2. On the topic of putting things on the table that nobody really uses or even understands in the community, integral methodological pluralism. We could say that Wilber came up with that, but it's not really good and nobody understands it or uses it really. And again, it's just kind of another bad categorization game. The Wilber-Combs matrix. Yeah, that's good. Understanding the relationship between states and stages, I think that's pretty helpful. In that same kind of vein, we have depth and span. That's also a pretty useful distinction. Maybe there's a couple more as well. So Wilber came up with some stuff, but if we're being honest, I've come up with just as much stuff as Wilber has, and we're about to look at a lot of it. As I've also said, Wilber's project of integration is conflationary and reductionist and biased, so it's not really good integration. Non-reductionism, on the other hand, has fair overarching standards. It doesn't break its own rules in terms of integration based on personal bias. And I think we'll see in the future that 4P4Z, the version of the new non-reductionist epistemology, that I came up with will actually be used by a lot of people, probably a lot of professional people, whereas I don't know anybody who uses integral methodological pluralism. So upgrades that non-reductionism brings to the table. Again, moving away from the classification game into the realm of practical action. Not just talking about what's, but talking about what's and how. Moving away from just the realm of understanding or a green flatland into the realm of practical action and engagement. Again, an emphasis on overarching standards and healthy non-bias integration. There's going to be both theoretical and structural upgrades, and an emphasis on maintaining integrity. There's also an inherent understanding of epistemic humility, an openness to criticism, refinement, debates, and upgrades, and a process to make that possible. It's going to be very important that we create a good community with healthy leadership. There's going to be an extra emphasis placed on self-mastery and becoming practices, not just state training practices. We also want to work together to create transformative new systems with an emphasis on mission and purpose, not just for individuals, but for humanity as a whole. This includes a focus on new religious and governance systems, like sacred naturalism and collective individualism. As I've already said, when it comes to the theory, there's a focus on non-bias integration. When it comes to the quadrants, it's not just equal emphasis to all four quadrants, but an understanding of primacy. There's going to be all new models, including nested quadratic holarchies. And surprisingly, in all of my study of philosophy for years, I've never heard anybody talk about philosophical primacy, the understanding that you have to do the philosophical projects in a particular order so that way they all harmonize with each other. Usually you just get thrown into the deep end of philosophy and grab things and pull them together, which doesn't make for very good integration. Instead, you actually have to do the philosophical projects in the correct order so that way they all harmonize with each other as our philosophical worldviews are developed. What we often see is that people will favor a particular philosophical project, and the conclusions that they come to in relation to that project end up sabotaging the other philosophical project and creating a bias and unhealthy philosophical worldview. So this results in a rational cosmology and ontology, an understanding of emergentism as it relates to consciousness. I also advocate for sacred naturalism, which is a this-worldly, non-supernatural, non-superstitious, non-divisive approach to healthy religious integration. Non-reductionism also includes a healthy understanding of the pre-trans fallacy and pre-trans distinctions. Also, when it comes to quadrants, there's an understanding of quadratic zoom, or quadrants within quadrants, and understandings of levels of scale. When I was talking to Daniel Gortz, he actually mentioned the idea of quadratic zoom, and I was like, oh, you mean quadrants within quadrants? So he knows about that, but he's never written about it, and I think I'm the only person to really introduce maps that have quadrants within quadrants within quadrants. And basically, when you do quadrants within quadrants, you get a much more holistic and nuanced understanding of what that practice actually is. There's also going to be new distinctions as it relates to understanding different levels of scale. Sometimes people will think that they're taking a four-quadrant perspective on a thing, but they end up actually finding solutions within one quadrant while thinking that they're covering another quadrant. So for example, when Wilber talks about the 3 S's of an integral spiritual practice, he mentions shadow work as if that covers the lower left quadrant, when really that's only a lower left practice within the upper left. And there's actually other important practices that relate to the lower left when it comes to spirituality, like acts of service. Non-reductionism also includes a healthy understanding of stages of development with no mystical bias, restoring integrity back to the spiral dynamics map. We're also making the distinction between implicit and explicit versions of personal integration more clear. This is a nuance that more knowledgeable members of the community have been talking about for a long time, but there hasn't really been shared or consistent terminology around it until now. Our new non-reductionist map includes 15 different developmental lines from different developmental psychologists, which serves to give us the most complete meta-analysis of lines of development ever. I also have some new interesting takes on lines of development that I don't think you've heard before. Of course, I'll get into that a little bit later once we talk more about the theory. A rational, healthy understanding of states. Non-reductionism also includes modes and roles and the self-mastery practice. As it relates to development, we also include ideas about height versus vastness, which has to do with how much knowledge one really has at each stage of development. A lot of times what happens is that people develop cognitively through stages of development quickly, and maybe they didn't spend enough time at particular stages, and they might need to go back and get more in touch with values and lessons and information to have a more full, healthy, and complete integration and personal development. When it comes to free will versus determinism, we have a view called semantic compatibilism, which is the understanding that first-person ways of talking about our experience and third-person ways of talking about our experience are not semantically compatible. I call it semantic compatibilism because compatibilism is a middle position between free will and determinism. But my friend Alyosha, what's up Alyosha? Hope you're doing well. He wrote a book about free will and determinism, and he likes to call it semantic incompatibilism for the same reason. Of course, from a more rational perspective, we understand that nature and nurture are both deterministic, and there's no such thing as free will. There's a heavily conditioned will, which isn't to say that one can't have any will. And of course, there's the difference between determinism and fatalism. This is a topic for a video in itself, but there's a much more nuanced perspective here than we have previously gotten from integral theory. When it comes to the project of creating new systems for humanity, we have collective individualism, new governance systems, and we'll also come out with a handbook for a revolutionary movement that has a plan to get us from where we are currently to where we'd like to go. So not just criticisms of the past system and ideas about where we'd like to go, but also a plan to get us there and ways to work together to refine both the plan and the new system once we arrive in it. These new governance systems get us past the might makes right systems of the past, both the top-down legislation of taste and the bottom-up mob rule that we're currently dealing with everywhere. In terms of our social systems, in order to maintain integrity, it's important that we have solid authority and leadership. Of course, I'm starting out as the main leader in this project, but one of the first things I plan to do is to create affordable and accessible courses with accreditation, so that way other people can be initiated into leadership and then further still be qualified to be able to critique ideas and offer upgrades to both the theory and how we work together. As a leader, I am active, available, and accessible. I'm not afraid of debates or public engagement and criticism. I welcome these things as ways to upgrade and improve what we're doing. I think it's important to have explicit standards and to maintain the integrity of our space and our project. Creating a healthy community around this project with no sexism and no racism and a space for people who are really at these stages of development to meet and feel comfortable together is so important. Having the courses and accreditation allows for a healthy hierarchy within the community. And eventually we'll have an open and transparent process to refine our ideas to upgrade and process tensions together. Not only is it important that we build this healthy community, that we empower individuals in it and we teach them the theory and teach them self-mastery and skillful, engaged practitioners in the world. Of course, as I've said, this extends further into movement and action, vision and transformation. And I think when it comes to aesthetics, this is much better production quality than what's offered in the other meta theory communities. You have a better free map. And eventually we'll also make some affordable merch and cool products available for you as well. Further, a lot of meta theorists have acted in a way that's kind of closeted and undercover. But I really want to see meta theorists in the world being out and bold and engaged, explicit, expressing our style, make our positions known. And when it comes to further upgrades, there's still a lot of room for improvement. And I don't personally claim to be the one with all the answers or to know everything. I know that a lot of the things that we're going to improve in the future are going to be based on conversations and engagement that we have together as a community. I've always said that I don't see myself as the leader, but as a leader who demonstrates the way and invites other people to join me on the path of leadership, because I don't think I can do it all by myself or alone. Your wisdom, your skill, and your leadership is definitely needed and welcome. Anybody who puts in the work can wear the crown. It's an elite to which all are invited. I think it's very important to create a ladder, so that way at the level of leadership we can have peers and work together. I think there's still lots of room for improvement. I think that when we study more about types and understanding what lines they prefer as they move through stages, there's still a lot that can be known about that. I think as we apply more quadratic zoom, we're going to get things like scale distinctions that start to emerge. Different meta-theoretical principles as different levels of scale relate to each other. I mentioned one earlier, where you think you have a quadrant covered when really you're just looking at a smaller level quadrant within a different quadrant. There could also be principles about how you don't need to go further levels down past a certain point if you have answered your question at a higher level. But I'm sure there's going to be more things that we still discover as it relates to scale. I'm also very excited about further exploring modes and roles and the self-mastery practice. I think there's a lot of new things still to be discovered and expressed there. I have some ideas about how to lay the groundwork for that, but it's still going to be interesting to figure out what might emerge into the future. And of course, there's still lots of room for improvement as it relates to particular applications of the theory in different disciplines and future governance upgrades and things like that. Non-reductionism is just getting started, and we're currently just building the first draft of it together. Probably in 2 to 5 years, we'll upgrade the map, and we'll continue to build upgrades together into the future. I know all that's a lot to digest, and I haven't really fully unpacked or explained a lot of it yet. I hope you can see the power and potential of a lot of these upgrades, and I hope you feel excited to dig in further and to engage and to see what more there is to learn and how we can grow together as a community. All right, thanks so much for watching. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Support me on Patreon. Big thanks to my Patreon supporters. And remember, if you like this video, go check out the full-length video where I talk about my history with meta-theory, the pros and cons of integral theory, the pros and cons of metamodernism, and the upgrades that non-reductionism brings to the table. Thanks again for watching. Peace.